Okay, I'll get started now. Again, welcome, good evening, California Air Resources Board Community Workshop on the Cap and Trade Program. Purpose of tonight's meeting is to give an overview of California's climate policies with a focus on the Cap and Trade Program. We're here to discuss the benefits of the program, potential amendments to the program, and here's some feedback from community members and groups who are tuned in about the potential changes to the program that are forthcoming. I am Mark Cipolla. I'm the chief of the Cap and Trade Program. I oversee the teams that are responsible for developing and implementing the Cap and Trade Program. Next slide, please. This meeting's being interpreted into Spanish. To access interpretation services, click the globe interpretation icon at the bottom of your Zoom window and select Spanish. To only hear the Spanish interpretation and not the original audio, select Mute Original Audio in the interpretation menu. Please select English in the interpretation menu, that's the globe icon, to enable hearing English translation of any comments provided in Spanish. We also have the presentation slide available in Spanish. To view the Spanish slides, select View Options at the top of the meeting window and select Spanish Slides. Our interpreter, Leticia Reyna, will now also give these instructions in Spanish to the entire audience before moving to the Spanish audio channel. Leticia?
Thank you. Muy buenas tardes a todos y gracias por estar con nosotros en esta junta. Esta tarde viene siendo el taller que viene siendo del CARB, que viene siendo la junta de Cap and Trade, que viene siendo solamente sobrepaso de pólizas, los beneficios y quizás algunas enmiendas, potenciales cambios que va a hacer Mark Tipler. Voy a dar un poco de instrucciones acerca de cómo subirse al canal escuchándolo en el español. Para interpretación en el español, usted va a seleccionar lo que tiene el módulo de español en interpretación. Usted le va a hacer clic en el icono de interpretación, que es un globo que usted va a mirar en la barra de herramientas de la plataforma de Zoom. Está en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Usted allí puede seleccionar español. Seleccione silenciar el audio original para poder escuchar solamente la interpretación en el español y no en el lenguaje original al mismo tiempo. Si usted quisiera, para poder seleccionar la plataforma de la presentación de diapositivas en español en la parte superior de la ventana de la reunión, usted ahí le puede hacer clic en donde dice ver opciones. Allí usted puede seleccionar diapositivas en español. Back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leticia. Some logistics. This workshop is being recorded. The recording will be posted to our Cap and Trade meetings and workshops webpage. We have 2 hours this evening. Thank you for setting aside the time to join us. There will be time for questions and comments at the end. We want to hear from as many commenters as possible. We ask that you keep your feedback to no longer than 2 minutes. Longer comments can be submitted in writing. Those written comments, we ask that you submit them by December 1st. You can find a link to submit feedback on our Cap and Trade meetings and workshops webpage. All presentation materials are available at that webpage as well. I'm going to provide just a brief overview of where we are with the Cap and Trade program before handing it off. California has set long-term targets to reduce climate pollution. We have a net zero greenhouse gas emissions target for 2045. We also have to reduce emissions by at least 85% by 2045 from 1990 levels. From the very beginning, the state has taken a holistic approach to reducing climate pollution through regulations, incentives, and placing a price on climate pollution. Taken together, we expect this overall strategy to bring benefits from reduced fossil fuel use, less climate impacts, and improved public health. The Cap and Trade program is the topic for today. Cap and Trade is the program that caps and prices climate pollution to complement the other regulations and incentives. The cap is an aggregate cap that is shared and limits emissions from all emission sources. Cap and trade was launched in 2012. The current design reflects input from a wide variety of stakeholders. These are expert committees, community leaders from the legislature, program participants, and many others. There was input during the development phase before 2012 and over the past 10 years of operating the cap and trade program. So there's already substantial program history, and any updates will need to consider that context. Cap and trade has helped reduce climate pollution since 2013. California had a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2020, and it met that target early. Cap and trade also supports a transition away from fossil fuels, reducing both greenhouse gas emissions and also local air pollution. We know certain communities are overburdened by local air pollution due to historic policies and actions. Recent studies show that while air pollution gaps still exist among communities, the greatest progress in reducing local air pollution in California since 2013 has happened in the most overburdened communities. Cap and trade also raises money that is invested into communities to further reduce pollution and improve air quality. To date, cap and trade has raised over $25 billion that's been invested into supporting sustainable communities, climate-friendly affordable housing, clean transportation options, and many other climate projects. The money also funds community air pollution programs, which support community-focused efforts to reduce local air pollution in the most overburdened communities. So cap and trade's been in place over a decade. Input's already been incorporated into cap and trade from a variety of sources. Climate pollution and local air pollution are decreasing, especially in overburdened communities. We met the 2020 target early. So we have evidence that the strategy of regulations, incentives, and complementary carbon pricing is working. We're now looking out to 2045. We're looking to that carbon neutrality target, to that target of 85% reduced emissions. And we're now considering cap and trade in that context. As you'll see later, this includes reducing the aggregate cap to increase the stringency of the program, which is expected to further reduce fossil fuel use, further reduce climate impacts, and further improve public health. Next slide, please. We will have two presentations today, one by an invited speaker and another by CARB staff. Then I want to spend as much of our time today listening to comments and feedback from community members and others who are in the audience. I'll now introduce our invited speaker, Martha Dina Arguello, co-chair of CARB's Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. Martha Dina is the executive director for the Los Angeles chapter of Physicians for Social Responsibility. Martha Dina, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining, and I want to thank the CARB staff for inviting me. I have served on the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee since 2007 and have experienced many of the scoping plans and many of our efforts to ensure that the cap and trade program and AB 32 in general meet its promise to actually make things better, not make things worse in our communities. That was a promise. So first slide, the next slide. And so we often use this diagram to show a number of things. One, the understanding the difference between equality, equity, and then while this says liberation, I usually use the term transformative. And we have wanted AB 32 to be transformative in our communities by improving air quality. And so we were very concerned that the cap and trade program is not really designed to deliver that kind of transformative process in our communities. And I was always struck by the writing of Frank Ackerman, who is a precautionary principle economist and does work on understanding cost-benefit analysis. And there's a quote in his book about the framers of the cap and trade program, where they at the center of that was not that equity or equality or even that transformation. They knew that it could end up concentrating pollution in some communities. Over the years, certainly in the South Coast, we have seen that with that program and the creation of toxic hotspots. So we've been deeply concerned with that process and the impacts, those unintended impacts of the cap and trade program. And we, the next slide. So here are the position at the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee and throughout has been that we actually need real zero. We want CARB to prioritize those direct emissions reduction measures in the scoping plan. And we want to make sure that we're not separating the greenhouse gas emissions and the trading program. No facility just emits carbon. And so we have to link that with real reductions in air pollution. And so we want to reduce the percentage of reductions expected from the cap and trade program so that we're getting more of those direct emissions reductions. CARB needs to strengthen the data reporting to ensure timely tracking of emissions changes. In a former scoping plan, we did get a recommendation to create an adaptive management program. That program has not been completed. It would allow us to see where the trades are happening, if there's emissions increases, whether they're related to the trades or not. If there's emissions reductions in a low-income community, that should be an alarm bell that we need to focus attention on getting those emissions reductions achieved. Next slide. Next slide. So the recommendations that we have are to eliminate free allowances, eliminate offsets and other tools that are used as off-ramps to compliance, and restrict trade and begin to study the possibility of restricting trading in environmental justice communities or areas where, you know what, their risk cup is full, their pollution cup is full. Let's really focus on reductions of both greenhouse gases and air pollution. It's a dangerous thing to split those two things off. Next slide. I think that's it. That was really fast.
Thank you so much, Martha Dina, for presenting. We will now have a presentation from CARB staff. Nora Kennedy will present on the role of cap and trade program in California's portfolio approach to fighting climate change, including what it covers, how it works, and how it could be updated to increase ambition. Nora, welcome. Proceed.
At the highest level, California's climate policies are determined by state legislation and executive orders. These statutes and directives establish statewide greenhouse gas emissions targets or sector-specific goals. The line graph on the left shows annual greenhouse gas or GHG emissions from 2000 through 2020 and California's GHG emissions reduction targets for 2020, 2030, and 2045. In light blue, the trend in actual emissions shows that California achieved the 2020 target of returning to 1990 emissions levels early, and that emissions have stayed below the target through 2020. The legislature has also set a target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. The plan for achieving the 2030 target is described in the 2017 Scoping Plan Update. And last year, the legislature established two goals for 2045: to reduce GHG emissions to 85% of 1990 levels and to achieve carbon neutrality, meaning that for whatever greenhouse gas sources exist in 2045, there is an equal or greater amount of natural or mechanical removals. The plan for reaching these 2045 targets is described in the most recent 2022 Scoping Plan Update for achieving carbon neutrality. California's climate policy portfolio includes regulations, incentives, and carbon pricing, all of which work together to ensure a robust approach to reducing GHG emissions. This slide identifies some key pieces of the portfolio approach. Because of the drastic reductions in fossil fuel consumption needed to meet the 2045 targets, there will be dramatic benefits to not just the climate, but also to local air quality and public health. The cap and trade program places a cap and a price on economy-wide GHG emissions, and it also raises funds for further GHG emissions reductions. There are a range of programs to address specific sectors, like emissions from vehicles and greater deployment of renewable electricity. The state is also in the process of developing strategies for natural and working lands, cement decarbonization, carbon capture and sequestration, and low carbon hydrogen. Finally, the state seeks to leverage state and federal funds for additional actions. Sources of funds include cap and trade program auction proceeds, the state general fund, the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill, and the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. Controls on greenhouse gas emissions operate under a regulatory framework that is separate from local air quality controls. Local air pollutants like particulate matter and oxides of nitrogen are primarily regulated under the Federal Clean Air Act, a broad statute that requires states to meet local air pollution standards. California has set its own, more stringent local air pollutant standards, and CARB establishes the state strategy for meeting all of its local air pollution targets. Generally, regulatory authority over local air pollution from specific sectors and sources is split among CARB and the local air districts. Local air districts oversee local air pollutant regulations and permitting for stationary facilities within their borders, such as oil refineries. And CARB regulates local air pollution from statewide mobile sources, such as cars and trucks. All greenhouse gas emissions are regulated at the state level under CARB authority. As previously mentioned, AB 32 gave CARB the authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions and the responsibility to ensure that the state's greenhouse gas emissions were reduced to 1990 levels by the year 2020. This legislation also gave CARB clear authority to establish a market-based system of declining aggregate annual greenhouse gas emission limits to address climate pollution. This authority led to establishing the cap and trade program. AB 32 directs CARB on how the cap and trade program and other climate regulations must be designed. In developing these regulations, CARB must consider the cost effectiveness and technological feasibility, minimize the administrative burden of implementation and compliance, minimize the leakage of emissions to out of state, and consider the significance of each source or category of sources to statewide GHG emissions. This slide shows an abbreviated history of the development of the cap and trade. Again, the program is rooted in AB 32 from 2006, which set a greenhouse gas emissions target for 2020 and authorized a market-based approach for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Development of the initial regulation also involved a robust public process, including over 40 informal public meetings with input from environmental justice groups, environmental groups, academics, industry, and other government agencies. After these informal engagements, California began a formal rulemaking process, which concluded with initial adoption in 2011. The program launched in 2012, and emissions obligations began in 2013. Since adoption, cap and trade has continued to evolve. California linked with the cap and trade system in Quebec in 2014. There were significant program updates in 2018, following the 2017 scoping plan and legislative direction in AB 398. In total, CARB has amended the program 8 times, consistent with CARB's general practice of updating its programs in response to new legislation and implementation experience. Each time CARB balanced input from the legislature, environmental organizations, communities, environmental justice groups, other government agencies, program participants, and the CARB board. The context of past decisions and the balancing of input from a range of stakeholders to design a stable and successful program is important when considering potential program changes. In 2017, the legislature passed two key pieces of legislation, one related to the cap and trade program. AB 398, which was passed by 2/3 of the legislature, provided clear authority to continue the program after 2020. It bolstered cost containment provisions, reduced the role of offsets, and prioritized high levels of free allocation to industrial entities. The cost containment provisions help ensure that California businesses and consumers are protected from price spikes, and the offset credit restrictions help ensure that California sees direct environmental benefits from most offset credits. The CARB board approved changes to cap and trade in 2018 that align with these AB 398 requirements, and these requirements are still in place. AB 617 was passed in conjunction with AB 398 in response to environmental justice concerns. It established the Community Air Protection Program to reduce exposures in communities most impacted by air pollution. This Community Air Protection Program's focus is to reduce exposure in communities most impacted by air pollution. Communities around the state are working together with CARB and local air districts to develop and implement new strategies to measure air pollution and reduce health impacts. On October 27th, our board approved the first update to the Community Air Protection Program statewide strategy. The updated strategy adds 3 new tools to the program: the use of community air grants to support local emissions reduction plans, flexibility in the use of incentive funds to meet community goals, and community-focused enforcement. These efforts are primarily funded by the Cap and Trade program. Another bill, AB 378, was considered in 2017 and ultimately not passed. It considered designating geographic zones within which facilities covered by the program could not trade program allowances and offsets, facility-specific caps on greenhouse gas emissions, and air pollution emission standards. The legislature instead opted to pursue the approach reflected in AB 398. With that context for the development of the program, I'll now give an overview of the existing California Cap and Trade program. Cap and Trade complements sector-specific programs by placing an economy-wide cap on statewide greenhouse gas emissions that decreases each year. The program currently covers about 400 facilities, including industrial facilities, electricity generators and importers, and suppliers of gasoline, diesel, and natural gas, all of which are known as covered entities. The annually declining cap is set to align with the state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets and goals. The program covers about 80% of statewide emissions. In-state facilities like electricity generators and industrial producers are regulated at the facility level. Imports of electricity are regulated when the electricity enters the state. Transportation fuels like gasoline and diesel are regulated at the supplier level. And natural gas supplied to smaller facilities like commercial buildings and homes are regulated at the natural gas fuel supplier level. CARB creates allowances equal to the cap each year. Each allowance is equal to 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. Each covered entity has an obligation to acquire and submit to CARB 1 allowance or a limited number of offset credits for each metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent that it emits in a year. Note that there are no facility-specific caps on greenhouse gas emissions, just a statewide cap that applies in aggregate across all facilities, and that cannot be exceeded. Because the cap declines, fewer allowances are created each year, and overall emissions must decrease over time. The reduced allowance supply means more competition for allowances, increasing the price signal over time. The increasing price signal encourages covered entities to find the lowest cost reductions first, ensuring that California consumers see the lowest cost from the program. Long term, the cap and trade program provides a price signal to invest in cleaner technologies while raising funds from the sale of allowances that are reinvested in communities to help further reduce emissions. At the same time, the number of allowances are decreasing annually. The cost to purchase allowances at auction each year also increases. There is an ongoing signal that paying for carbon emissions will cost more each year. The cap and trade program operates on high quality data and has robust enforcement mechanisms when rules are not followed. Greenhouse gas emissions data are annually reported to CARB, and those emissions and associated data are verified by third-party verifiers that are independent and accredited by CARB. The program has thorough registration requirements and allowance purchase and holding limits to protect against market manipulation. There are also strong compliance incentives. For instance, if an entity misses a compliance deadline to surrender allowances, they are responsible for surrendering 4 allowances for every missed allowance. CARB also retains its usual strong authority to enforce program requirements, including through financial penalties. CARB works with other agencies like the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the California Department of Justice to monitor related markets and ensure program integrity. Now, I'll give a summary of protections and benefits that the cap and trade program has provided to the state over the past decade plus. Through 2021, over 2.1 billion allowances were surrendered to the cap and trade program, holding entities accountable for their greenhouse gas emissions. 100% of entities have complied with their obligations to date, demonstrating that this program provides an achievable and successful approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Achieving the 2020 emissions reduction target early means enhanced climate benefits. The state has held 44 allowance auctions since 2012, generating over $40 billion in proceeds to protect natural gas and electric utility consumers and to fund the California Climate Investments Program. Cap and trade is the sole source of funding for the California Climate Investments Program, and also has provided 90% of state funding to the AB 617 Community Air Protection Program. California Climate Investments is a statewide initiative that invests proceeds from the sale of state-owned allowances into programs and projects that help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve public health and the environment in California. Through May 2023, over 74% of the $9.8 billion that has been spent has been directed to priority populations, including disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and low-income households. Cumulatively, California Climate Investments projects will reduce an estimated 98 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent and over 85,000 tons of criteria air pollutants. Projects range from clean transportation to affordable housing and sustainable communities, from waste diversion to conserving or restoring natural and working lands, and more. California Climate Investments reduce greenhouse gas emissions and provide benefits to Californians through a diversity of projects across the state. Cap and trade program allowances are distributed in a manner to help achieve the requirements of AB 32 and the goals of the program. Most allowances are sold at quarterly auctions. Proceeds from state-owned allowances funds the California Climate Investments Program and the Community Air Protection Program. A slightly smaller number of allowances are allocated to electrical and natural gas utilities for the purpose of customer protection, which I'll discuss more on the next slide. Slightly over 15% of allowances are allocated to industry to support the retention of efficient production in California. 5% of allowances are allocated to the Allowance Price Containment Reserve, which protects businesses and California consumers from potential spikes in allowance prices. As noted on the previous slide, almost 40% of allowances are allocated to electric and natural gas utilities to protect customers from increased utility costs. The utilities consign a portion of these allowances to the cap and trade auctions, and the proceeds from the sale at auction must be used by the consigning utility to benefit its own ratepayers. Most allowance value provided to utilities is returned to utility customers in the form of California climate credits. These are flat credits, meaning they are not tied to the amount of electricity or natural gas consumed. And for a given utility, each customer receives the same credit amount. Climate credits are an important tool to protect utility customers while maintaining the carbon price signal and preserving incentives for energy conservation. Some utility allowance value is used to reduce customer greenhouse gas emissions, such as funding incentives to install solar on multifamily affordable housing and incentives for high efficiency electric appliances. Through 2021, over $7.4 billion in allowances provided to utilities have been directly returned to customers or designated for greenhouse gas emissions reduction projects. As required by AB 32, CARB designed cap and trade to minimize the potential for emissions leakage. Emissions leakage is a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions in state with a corresponding increase in out-of-state greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions leakage can occur when costs faced by regulated businesses in California are not shared by competitors outside of California. On the right, you can see an example where we have in-state industrial facilities facing competition from out-of-state facilities. If in-state businesses were to fully pass through compliance costs to consumers, consumers may shift to purchasing out-of-state goods that are cheaper. This could lead to decreased emissions in production in-state, but increased emissions in production out-of-state. CARB addresses this risk primarily through direct allocation of allowances to industrial facilities. The approach to direct allocation incentivizes clean in-state production and jobs within California and is crucial for ensuring overall greenhouse gas emissions reductions. We know that many are concerned about local air pollutants that affect health in nearby communities. Historic disparities exist where certain low-income and disadvantaged communities experience greater local air pollution burdens. The cap and trade program was designed to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, which do not always correlate with emissions of local air pollutants. There are a number of independent studies, including a 2022 report by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, that show that the cap and trade program has not exacerbated harmful air pollution in overburdened communities. The graphic on the left from a 2022 study by a research team associated with UC Santa Barbara shows that the gap between overburdened communities and other communities narrowed after program implementation for both ambient fine particulate matter and NOx, two important local air pollutants with health impacts. This reversed the trend of a growing gap before cap and trade started. The Callan virus screen map on the right shows that the distribution of fine particulate matter in California's census tracts is strongly influenced by geography and non-point sources. These elements need to be considered when addressing exposure to local air pollutants. CARB and air districts have addressed harmful local air pollutants through targeted regulations, and CARB has sought additional authority and new tools from the legislature. CARB's Community Air Protection Program, which was established through AB 617, works in partnership with local air districts and communities to address local air pollution sources and to reduce exposures for community residents. These efforts have improved air quality across the state and especially in overburdened communities, although disparities remain. As shown on the right, CARB's targeting of heavy-duty transport and goods movement sector has dramatically reduced toxic diesel exhaust in overburdened communities since 2020. In response to previously raised concerns about certain elements of the cap and trade program, CARB has evaluated connections between the program and local air pollution, facility-specific greenhouse gas emissions reductions requirements, the number of banked allowances, and the forestry offset protocol. These are data-driven evaluations based on accurate information, and they are available to you on the Cap and Trade website. The process to update the program is being informed by the 2022 Scoping Plan update, evolving state policy, and updated greenhouse gas emission inventory and implementation experience. Each update to the Climate Change Scoping Plan allows California to assess progress on achieving the state's climate targets. The 2022 Scoping Plan incorporates executive orders, legislative direction, and board direction to lay out a technologically feasible and cost-effective plan to carbon neutrality by 2045. The modeling in the 2022 Scoping Plan is informing review and updates to the Cap and Trade program. Just as we considered the 2017 Scoping Plan update during Cap and Trade program changes in 2018, the 2022 Scoping Plan modeling shows that we need to increase our ambition for 2030 emissions reductions to meet the 2045 targets. The current review of the Cap and Trade program also reflects the latest updates to the greenhouse gas emission inventory to base the inventory more directly on the highest quality verified data where possible. CARB staff is evaluating a range of scenarios for updating the program cap to set the state on the path to meet the 2045 targets. This slide presents 3 possible program cap scenarios presented relative to the current 2030 program cap. The 40% by 2030 scenario is consistent with the existing 2030 target, reducing emissions by 40% from 1990 levels, and will evaluate the impact of reflecting recent adjustments made to the greenhouse gas emission inventory. The 48% by 2030 scenario is informed by the increased ambition that the 2022 Scoping Plan indicates is needed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045. And the 55% by 2030 scenario illustrates an upper bound on ambition for 2030. This slide shows the total potential reduction in allowances for the period 2021 through 2030 for each scenario. Reducing the program caps will support the long-term price signal to invest in cleaner technologies. CARB is also examining potential program cap scenarios post-2030 through 2045, informed by state climate goals. The caps from the current cap and trade regulation are shown in blue. The red, yellow, and green lines show potential caps from 2021 through 2045, associated with the 40, 48, and 55% 2030 target scenarios, respectively. For 2021 through 2030, the cap reductions are achieved by retiring allowances from the 2025 through 2030 caps. Post-2030 allowance caps are then set on a straight line trajectory to the cap level needed to in 2045 to support carbon neutrality. Increasing the stringency of the program will support reduced fossil fuel use to further reduce climate impacts and improve public health. In addition to revised program caps, CARB staff is also considering other potential updates reflective of implementation needs in the state's climate policies. These topics may include, but are not limited to, mechanisms to further incentivize industrial decarbonization, review of ratepayer and low-income protections provided by utility allocation, updated treatment of biogenic CO2 emissions, and updates to compliance offset protocols. This slide presents an overview of the informal and formal processes for updating the cap and trade program. We are currently in the informal pre-rulemaking phase, where we work with stakeholders and interested members of the public to spread awareness of potential program updates, hear feedback on how the program is working, and identify additional ways in which the program could be improved. This community meeting follows a series of informal workshops during which we presented information about the existing cap and trade program, discussed concepts for new and updated provisions, and sought stakeholder input. Public engagement during this informal development period is important in the construction of the formal rulemaking package. The formal rulemaking is a regulatory process defined by certain milestones along specific timelines in accordance with California's Administrative Procedures Act. The initial rulemaking package will be announced by a formal public notice. It will include proposed regulatory text, a report from CARB staff that describes the rationale for proposed changes, and economic and environmental analysis. After releasing the initial proposal, CARB has 1 year to submit the final rulemaking record to the Office of Administrative Law. The formal rulemaking will also include multiple opportunities for further public input, such as the 45-day and 15-day comment periods, and CARB will respond to public comments in the final statement of reasons. CARB will keep the public apprised of these developments as the rulemaking process proceeds. Today, we're particularly interested in hearing your feedback in response to the following questions. What priorities should CARB have when amending the cap and trade regulation to achieve GHG emissions reductions supportive of state climate goals? What 2030 target should the cap and trade program use to develop updated allowance budgets? How should the value of allowances distributed to utilities be used to maximize ratepayer benefit and protect low-income communities? How can the cap and trade program balance increasing ambition or lower program caps with managing costs and maintaining clean industrial production within California? We also welcome other comments and questions on the cap and trade program. Here's how we will conduct the public comment portion of this community meeting. If you'd like to share feedback or ask questions, please use the raise hand function, which should be located on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window, as shown. When staff calls your name and activates your audio controls, please click the unmute button and proceed to introduce yourself and provide your comment. We will work to hear from as many commenters as possible, so we ask folks to keep their feedback to no longer than 2 minutes and to submit longer comments in writing. Select English in the interpretation menu to enable hearing simultaneous English interpretation of any comments provided in Spanish. If multiple people are joining from one location, please let us know when we call on you so we can plan accordingly. Written feedback will be accepted online until December 1st, 2023 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to submit feedback as well as all relevant documents on our cap and trade meetings and workshops page. We also have a timer on the top right of the slide so that you know how much time is remaining. With that, I will now pass things to Michael Turgeon, who will be facilitating the public comment section.
Thank you, Nora, for that great presentation. Yes, I will be facilitating our public comments this evening. So as Nora mentioned, please use the raise hand function on your toolbar if you would like to provide a comment. Looks like currently nobody has raised their hand to join the queue. So we'll give folks a few moments to organize your thoughts and do so. Okay, great. Looks like we have our first commenter, who is Lisa Dans. Lisa, I have allowed you to unmute yourself, so you may now do so to provide your comment. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Lisa Dans. I live in Fremont, California, and I support the most aggressive cap reduction. And one idea for how to make that affordable for consumers that's come out of the legislature is AB 858, which has not yet been passed, but it would set aside some of the revenue to be distributed as a dividend or as a carbon cashback to Californians. I don't know if that's within your authority to do something like that without the bill passing, but I think that that type of a policy would allow the cap to lower more aggressively by protecting people from the rising prices. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, for the comment. I will note that we had a couple slides on the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which is where the proceeds from the sale of state-owned auctions go. We mentioned a couple times that's around $25 billion, over $25 billion to date. We provide advice on how those proceeds get spent. Ultimately, those are dispersed by the legislature and the governor's office through the annual budget process. That's not something that CARB has direct oversight over, but we note your comment. I will also point out an additional feature that was pointed out during Nora's presentation, which is the California Climate Credit. Again, derived from the allowances in the cap and trade program. That value goes to the utilities and it shows up in annual or biannual flat credits on residential customers' electricity bill and gas bill to alleviate any costs. So that's a similar type of approach that is an existing feature of the program.
Great, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Lisa, for your comment. We do have one other hand in the queue at this time, and that is Carlos Arcila. Carlos, I have allowed you to unmute yourself, so you may now do so to provide your comment. Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is Carlos Arcila. First of all, congratulations for all the work that you have done to adjust the cap and trade system. In my opinion, and looking at the analysis we have done, I'm an analyst for the Research Center of Universidad de los Andes, and I'm very involved also in the carbon markets. One of the main questions we try to answer is not only to get to the target that we want in emission, but when. And I think the acceleration of the reduction is key, not only to be able to reach the goal, but to do it as fast as we can. So in that case, we found that the most aggressive reduction target of 55 will be the one that we like to see more viable and support. Not only for the decarbonization, but also doing that by 2030, it can send a strong message for other technologies that has or policies that are around the cap and trade to incentivize abatement or competitiveness of other solutions that today are costly. So my comment goes to support this 55 and the most aggressive reduction target. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Carlos. Acknowledged, and I will point out that that is one of the scenarios that the CARB staff have been evaluating as we look at removals of allowances from the budgets, and encourage you to submit additional thinking in writing if you're interested in doing that by December 1st.
Looks like we already have one person in the queue, and that person is Martin Delson. Martin, I have allowed you to unmute yourself, so you may now do so to provide your comment. Thanks.
I have questions, not a comment. And
Sure thing.
in general, I'd like to know before I don't know how much time I have to ask questions. Is there a way that I can submit questions about how the program is running to some person or address and receive a response, say, week or two, in some short time?
I don't know if Rachel or Matt want to hop on here to comment, but yeah, we're always open to receiving questions and trying to answer what we can. We have a comment docket up here for this specific workshops, but if there's other things, email's always a great option. I don't know if you want to add anything, Rachel.
Can you give me an email address then?
Yes, absolutely. We have an email address that I think I will pull up right now, which is our Cap and Trade workshop email, and you can either submit your questions in the docket as Michael suggested, or via our email. And let me just, we don't have that on the screen.
Okay, I can submit it via the docket.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thanks so much.
Okay, if I have a minute left, what I'm interested in, among other things, is what is the current cost of an allowance for somebody to purchase the permission to emit 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent? What does that cost now?
We have our a list of recent allowance prices posted on our webpage and on our program data page. So that gives you some overview of the current allowance prices. And I think they're in about the $35 range. Matt?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Kind of hop in there and offer up as Rachel mentioned, we post information on the settlement of our auctions, and we post that information on our website, and it's roughly around $34 as of the last settlement. There are also secondary market transactions that happen, but the data is on our website for the auction settlement prices.
Okay, thank you. I'll submit the other questions then in the comment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Great. Yeah, we could reset the timer there. At this time, it looks like we have one other person with their hand up, and that is John Schaefer. John, I have allowed you to unmute yourself, so you may now do so to provide your comment. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this important issue. Given the rate at which climate is changing, and we see it in the news just in the last few days, I hope CARB can target a maximum reduction path. And along those lines, I wonder if CARB is taking into account the recommendations from the Independent Emissions Market Advisory Council, IMAC, to reduce allowances still at large in the market by repurchasing them and eliminating the use of what may be a lot of false offsets. Similarly, can CARB cover the 20% of emissions left uncapped? And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that 20% involved and why we can't get at them. Finally, can you address a mechanism that would raise cap and trade prices closer to the social cost of carbon? Thank you.
Hey, John, thanks for the questions and the comments. Of course, as always, encourage you to submit anything that you'd like to put into the record, into the comment docket. A couple of topics that I'll jump in here. So staff did a real detailed presentation on October 5th, actually, on options for cap setting between now and 2030 and post 2030 that look at various different options for the allowance budgets, given scenarios that we think align with our long-term decarbonization strategy for carbon neutrality by 2045 and to accelerate progress towards our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in 2030, given that we know we need to accelerate our greenhouse gas reductions to be on a path to carbon neutrality. This all comes from the direction that we had in the scoping plan. And so I'd encourage you, if you want to get into all of the finer points of what those allowance budgets could look like between now and 2030 and how we could decline those caps with various different options to align with a 40%, 48%, or 55% reduction by 2030, to take a look at that October 5th workshop. And then as far as your question about offsets, so we also initiated a workshop in December of last year where we requested feedback on our U.S. forest offset protocol and ways in which we could look at improving the science that supports the U.S. forest offset protocol and how we could continue to update our offset protocols. We've updated them numerous times over the years to follow the most recent science and to make sure that as we are issuing offset credits, that those are meeting the AB 32 requirements of real permanent, verifiable, enforceable, additional, and we are going to continue to update those protocols and welcome feedback on how we can ensure that that is continue to be a very rigorous offset program. The questions about the other 20% and emissions that are outside of the cap. So largely what we're talking about here are emissions that are fugitive emissions or that are more difficult to include in a cap and trade program because of their the nature of those emissions. And so I'll give you an example. Dairy livestock methane emissions that are happening are fugitive emissions that happen from manure that is produced from the dairy industry in California. They've traditionally been hard to track from a fugitive emission basis because they are released off of these manure lagoons. Other fugitive emissions coming off of landfills, for instance, same thing. The nature of the cap and trade program is such that we require very rigorous annual reporting, third-party verification of that data, so that we have clear metrics and rigorous data on the emissions that are coming off of these sources, and then we can make sure that they are covered under the cap and trade program. Of course, welcome any feedback that you or others may have on other sources to be included in the program, but the standard is high for the data rigor that we need to be able to include them into the cap and trade program. I think that's probably it for now. Hopefully I covered the main topics there, and I'm going to give it back to Michael if there's more folks in the queue.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, John, for your questions. Yeah, thank you. We can reset the timer now, and we will now turn to our next commenter, who is Carlos Arcila. Carlos, I have allowed you to unmute yourself, so you may now do so to provide your comment. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to make a question regarding the last point that John mentioned of a mechanism, maybe something close like the MSR that exists in Europe. And if it's something that are you considering due to what happened in Europe as one of the policies that help the market stability and also promote the investment in low carbon technologies, prevent this allowance surplus, and if it's something that the analysis in the CARB is taking into the account. Also, I know in November 16, you're going to present some price scenarios with the different scenarios that you have in reduction. And I wonder if you are considering now that Washington announced this linkage or this intention of linkage, and how that could affect not only the scenarios that you are presenting, but also the price scenarios that you are looking at. Thank you.
Matt, maybe I'll start off this response. Carlos, thank you for those comments and questions. I will say on questions about other elements that are going to be included or may be included in, stay tuned for the November 16th workshop. We look forward to sharing concepts on with everyone then. Related to some of the market areas. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Matt, if you have anything else.
Nothing else really to add, just welcome any feedback on the comment docket. And, obviously pointing out that also the program does have an auction reserve price that we establish for each of the quarterly auctions that raises each year. And so there is and that reserve price does increase on the program. All right, Michael, anything else?
Nope. Thanks, Matt. It looks like we don't have any other hands raised in the queue right now. So
okay. And it was Martin that was asking the question about an email address, right? It seems like you guys were able to pull that up.
Yeah, it looks like the
yes,
email
absolutely.
address we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read it, and then maybe if one of the staff could just send it to Martin directly to during the chat, but it's ctworkshop@arb.ca.gov. So hopefully that'll help you out, Martin, so you can send your questions that way and we can get those answered.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Martin does have his hand up, so maybe Martin, did you have anything else to add at that point? We can get you the email address for any specific questions.
I have further questions if there's time to ask them, or follow-up questions. If no one else has questions and we still have an hour, I'd like to ask some of them now about the economics of it, which is what's interesting to me. My motivation really is a concern that rising prices of, I'm certainly in favor of reducing emissions. Let me make that clear at the beginning. But my concern is that as prices rise of fuel and products that are produced by burning fuel, that the political support for cap and trade may evaporate as people start feeling it in their pocketbook. For example, if there is a $35 cost of an allowance and it is translated into the cost of gasoline, that's 35 cents roughly on a gallon of gasoline, given the amount of carbon dioxide that's produced when burning a gallon of gas. Is that a correct conclusion, that the prices of gas in California are 35 cents a gallon higher than they would be if there weren't cap and trade? If not, why isn't that correct? What am I not understanding? And if it is correct, then my concern is if that knowledge is widespread, people are not going to continue supporting the increasing cost of allowances as it's affected. And so, okay, I'll leave it at that as with a question. And then a comment can follow up on your answer.
Sure. So thanks, Martin. Just real quickly. So when we evaluate making regulatory updates, we also do an economic and a health analysis associated with those rulemaking updates. We also, as part of the scoping plan process, did a health and economic analysis associated with the scoping plan. And what we found is that, if we are successful in achieving carbon neutrality by 2045, we could achieve something on the order of $200 billion in annual health benefits associated with the reduced pollution and economic impacts of climate change that we avoided based on achieving carbon neutrality and deploying the strategies that we did for carbon neutrality. There's a clear health and environmental benefit to doing this. That being said, there are some potential costs that it would be incurred by these policies. And as far as a direct cost impact on gasoline, that's a little bit more challenging. There's many factors that go into the prices that people pay at the pump, from global energy markets to producer costs to transport costs, as well as taxes that are also assessed, and other environmental programs that are part of that calculus as well. So it's not as simple as just taking a straight line from the allowance price to a potential price at the pump. But what we do when we move forward with these rulemakings is is this more comprehensive economic analysis, and they will be one of those that will come out as part of the cap and trade program as well, and the health analysis and the health benefits that will come from reducing all of the fossil fuel emissions that are driving poor health outcomes, particularly in disadvantaged and low-income communities. So I know that you had another question. I'll take one more, and then if you have others, I'm welcome to submit those via email so you can have the back and forth with the staff too. So it's not just you and I having a dialogue with the 40 people on the line.
Again, I hesitate to monopolize the discussion, and Michael, is there anybody else that wants to speak? Otherwise, I'll continue. I'm happy to continue because I'm not pleased with that answer, and I'll tell you why. I'm not disputing that there are health benefits. I'm in favor very much of reducing particulate emissions and CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. I'd love to see that driven further and as quickly as possible. My concern is that public support for the program may be lost as people start feeling it in their pocketbook. Yes, there certainly will be health benefits. I'm not disputing that at all, and I'm very much in favor of it. My concern is that the program will lose popular support.
Thanks for that input. And I think, as Matt said, we'd really appreciate your comments in writing also, or if you have additional questions you'd like to ask. One of the things in this and in all of our rulemakings in cap and trade is how to balance the cost of the program and achieving our greenhouse gas emissions and what those impacts are. And as Minjung laid out, we have tools in the program to also help mitigate those costs on ratepayers, both through the use of greenhouse gas reduction funds and through our allowance allocation to our utilities that go back directly to ratepayers. So those are some of the ways that we help support Californians as we transition to this low carbon economy. And if you have further thoughts, we'd love to hear about them too. So thanks so much.
Yeah, and then I'll just layer into that these are some of the questions on slide 37 that we were asking for input via the comment docket too, and then to add to what Rachel had mentioned, we also have this program through climate investments that is meant to help support providing low-income and disadvantaged communities support for moving to lower greenhouse gas emitting approaches, the help with the purchase of zero emission vehicles, with energy as well, and other affordable housing and transit solutions. So there's an equity feedback mechanism built into the cap and trade program via the use of both the climate credit and the cap and trade proceeds. All right, so Michael, do we have anybody else in the queue?
We do not. I believe we are all clear to move to closing remarks. So thanks again, everyone, for a great discussion.
And I think that's actually back to me. So just real briefly, I'm going to reiterate a couple of points, but again, I appreciate you all taking the time tonight to participate in the workshop and to ask questions and to hear the presentation. I want to, even though I don't think she's here, I want to again thank Martha Dina for giving our presentation and the perspectives of the Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. And I'm going to encourage folks to put their comments into the comment docket. We also have additional workshops coming this year. So if you really want to get into all of the details on cap and trade, completely welcome it. There'll be more discussion to come on the program. And in fact, our next workshop, I believe, is the 16th, which is, I think, Thursday next week. And we will be having additional workshops after that. So again, thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. And we'll be talking soon.